An important story is unfolding about the future of humanity and the planet we inhabit. A unique perspective on this story follows, coming from author Fred Harrison. This video introduces the viewer and listener to the perspectives gained by the author over nearly half a century of research, writing, and active campaigning for systemic change. As I began to read book one of the trilogy, I was reminded of two earlier authors who followed similar paths of discovery. In 1978, the British science historian and author James Burke brought human history to life in the television series Connections. Burke took us on a journey of explanation and insight that required us to think more deeply about the human condition and the complexities of modern life. In the opening chapter of the accompanying book, he introduced readers to what he described as the trigger effect. A community may continue to exist as long as it has adequate food, and it may expand as long as food production can keep up with the increase in numbers. But it is not until it can produce food which is surplus to requirements, and is therefore capable of supporting those who are not food producers, that it will flourish. The first man-made harvest freed mankind from total and passive dependence on the vagaries of nature, and at the same time tied him forever to the very tools that set him free. The modern world in which we live is the product of that original achievement, because just as the plow served to trigger change in the community in which it appeared, each change that followed led to further change in a continuing sequence of connected events. What James Burke produced in 1978 is an example of the power of communication technology to affect the form and rate of change. In 1978, the state of the art was telecommunications. Yet here in this photograph, we see James Burke sitting at a computer terminal, perhaps waiting for the development of the internet. Yet in his penetrating study is this warning. Science and technology have immeasurably enriched our material lives. If we are to realize the immense potential of a society living in harmony with the systems and artifacts which it has created, we must learn, and learn soon, to use science and technology to enrich our intellectual lives. Burke went on to add to his investigation of human history, producing the 10-part television series The Day the Universe Changed, and later an even longer version of Connections. His television programs and his books have reached millions of people, as have similar works produced by countless other knowledgeable, sincere, caring people, such as Jacob Bernowski's The Ascent of Man. And yet the depth of the problems facing humanity is by all accounts worsening. The reason this is the case has been the focus of the research, writing, and advocacy for systemic reform by my longtime friend and colleague Fred Harrison. For those not familiar with him, Fred is research director of the London-based Land Research Trust. He is a graduate of the Universities of Oxford and London. His first book, The Power in the Land, 1983, predicted the economic crisis of 1992. He followed this with a 10-year forecast published in The Chaos Makers in 1997 that a global financial crisis would be triggered when house prices peaked in 2007. Fred's many years of deep reflection, combined with a re-examination of human evolution and history, is detailed in his new We Are Rent trilogy. The story he tells us is troubling, in that it asks us to accept responsibility for the socio-political arrangements and institutions that continue to put us on a collision course with ourselves and with nature. In the promotional material for We Are Rent, Fred describes what the reader will learn. He says, "Our world is being driven into a catastrophe many times worse than the COVID crisis, but the worst can be avoided." Other forecasters are promoting gloomy prognoses with the aid of flawed economic models. A better life is possible beyond the COVID virus, beyond Brexit, beyond Trump, beyond the culture of cheating that compresses people's lives. To convert disaster into triumph, informed citizens must intervene in the fate of their communities. That's the lesson Fred learned from previous attempts at laying the foundations for good governance, like the bid to rebuild post-Soviet Russia. During the 1990s, the people of Russia could have avoided the cannibalistic aspects of the system we know as capitalism, but which is at its roots characterized by systemic privilege that results in the redistribution of wealth from its producers to non-producing rentier interests. Fred and a team he brought together, myself included for one of many trips to Russia, spent a decade working in Moscow and St. Petersburg to explain how to create an authentic democracy. This would be achieved by constructing a value-adding economy not burdened by the free rider problem, that is, when people can consume a good without paying towards it. The solution required combining the private ownership of tangible capital goods, such as buildings, machinery, and technologies, while pooling the rents that flow from Russia's natural resources. For those not familiar with the teachings of the political economists, rent is that portion of the tangible wealth we produce that is associated with advantage of one location over another. The 19th century political economist David Ricardo applied scientific analysis to state this relationship as a fundamental law. Advantage can come from nature in the form of concentrated sources of fossil fuels or subsurface minerals, forests of useful trees, soils capable of high crop yields, or more subtle advantages such as a temperate climate, adequate rainfall, a natural harbor, reliable winds for the construction of wind farms, or long hours of sunlight for the construction of solar farms. Additional forms of advantage arise because of the concentration of human population in towns and cities. Locations in central business districts benefit most by the presence of quality public goods and services, so that the potential annual rental value, the rent, is measured as the price per square foot or meter. Claims on the tangible wealth produced also generate rents for an asset with an inelastic supply, such as takeoff and landing slots at airports. The issuance of competition limiting licenses by government also enables the holder of the license to generate income above what would otherwise be earned. All across Russia, those resources were already in the public domain, ready to generate the revenue needed by the people of Russia. Instead, the Kremlin allowed a privileged few to grab the rent-yielding assets. Fred tells us that the next systemic crisis was also an opportunity to reconstruct the capitalist order. His own research and that of a small group of economists with an unusual understanding of property market cycles confirmed the existence of a roughly 18-year cycle of boom to bust. As British economists and political leaders faced yet another recession in 1992, Fred reminded readers of the publication Land and Liberty of what he warned in 1988 was ahead. I confidently predict that the next major economic recession, the one that will cause widespread unemployment and business closures, will occur in 1992. Taming the cyclical character of the world's land markets required a fresh understanding that economics as taught and relied upon by policymakers was not only flawed, but that the flaws were intentionally introduced by those with a strong vested interest in maintaining the status quo. What was needed, Fred concluded, was a direct assault on the theoretical biases of mainstream economics from within the discipline. And so he enlisted University of California economics professor Mason Gaffney to collaborate on the book The Corruption of Economics, published in 1994. The effort to help guide the process of introducing market forces in Russia began to unravel in 1997, when Boris Yeltsin introduced legislation to eliminate the taxation of land and thereby privatize rent. Fred would write in the summer of 2000 of the consequences. During the Yeltsin years, laws and decrees had been passed without consulting the Russian people, which resulted in natural resources being given away to a small minority. A considerable part of the revenue from resources fled the country rather than being shared among the population. A final effort at democratic economic reform was made that autumn by Georgy Bus, State Duma deputy chairman. Bus had served as Minister of Taxation during the Yeltsin years, but was removed from office before his proposals could find support. Early on, Vladimir Putin seemed to be on the right side of history, but Russia's natural wealth continued to be siphoned off by a privileged few. Fred came to realize that the message of how to achieve real economic justice and thereby institutionalize the essence of democracy had to be changed. In the autumn of 2000, he began to edit a new publication, Geophilus, in an effort to reach an expanded audience. As Fred continued his commentary on the state of Britain's economy, he was invited by BBC Radio Scotland to share his insights. In an interview broadcast in April of 2005, he told listeners, "The theory I have been able to develop of the property cycle indicates that there will be growth for at least another couple of years, but the Scottish economy is actually headed towards a precipice because prices are actually rising very strenuously. The turning point will be towards the end of 2007. Which is when the property cycle will have exhausted itself, and beyond that we will see the market go dead and the economy then start to suffer severely." Astute investors may have been paying attention to this warning. Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, continued to express optimism that government policies would prevent the kind of downturn Fred was forecasting. A detailed analysis by Fred was published in 2005 with the title Boom Bust: House Prices, Banking, and the Depression of 2010. In November of 2006, he once again raised a warning that went unheeded. Readers of Money Week were advised, "House prices can't rise forever. At some point, people just can't afford them. The current frenzy of activity suggests a rapidly overheating market, and in fact, the rise in repossessions has already begun, as overstretched first-time buyers and low-income buy-to-let investors feel the strain from rising interest rates." Fred gave governments 10 years advance warning to prepare for the financial crisis of 2008. They failed to act. A decade of austerity and high unemployment followed. Then, when the crash finally occurred, Fred's forecast found a modicum of interest, although not from many in a position to appropriately address the cause of the problems by introducing needed changes in law. Leading financial experts were pulled together in 2009 by economist Joseph Stiglitz, appointed by the United Nations to investigate the causes of the financial and economic crisis and to offer recommendations for systemic reforms. The Stiglitz report was released in 2009. After studying the findings in the report, I decided to invite Fred Harrison and a group of economists to read the report and participate in a roundtable discussion to critique the findings and recommended reforms. This roundtable was held during the annual conference of the Council of Georgist Organizations in August of 2011. Invitations to participate were extended to those pictured here. At the event, Fred Harrison and I were joined by Nick Tiedemann and Polly Cleveland for a robust discussion. From Fred's prepared comments, here is his bottom line assessment of the report. We conclude that the recommendations in this report cannot deliver on most of these goals. The Stiglitz report confines itself to the conventional wisdoms that are reported in the daily press. Although Stiglitz himself claims that they were commissioned with the freedom to develop new ideas, the burden of their recommendations is directed at the re-regulation of the financial sector. Fiscal reform is limited to issues relating to the environment and is largely presented in obtuse language. There is no treatment of tax reform in terms that would amount to a counter-cyclical strategy for stabilizing the capitalist economy. This means that the primary source of instability in the capitalist economy, the pursuit of unearned income via the land market, will continue to destabilize the global economy over the next business cycle. Fred's next major book project he titled The Traumatized Society, in which he described what he identified as, quote, the greatest crime ever committed in the history of mankind. And just what is this crime? It is the systematic destruction of civilization caused by an entrenched culture of cheating. He wrote, cheating was institutionalized by the rent-seekers of the past 500 years who developed the art of manipulating our minds. They needed us to lose track of what they were doing, and they were eminently successful in their mission. No steps are being taken to erase that cheating because it is not recognized for what it is, a corrupted culture that impoverishes the lives of everyone. During the first decade of the 2000s, an almost continuous stream of books and articles flowed from his pen. At the same time, he was producing hard-hitting videos uploaded to YouTube. With the messages conveyed, his videos deserve to go viral, but have fallen far short. In the spring of 2015, I reviewed Fred's new book, directed to his fellow Britons regarding how their rights to a decent human existence were taken from them by the force of law, beginning with Magna Carta. He presented evidence that the very design of the House of Commons was the instrument of privilege and despotism. That house served a culture which abused the people of the Commons of England and then of the British Isles for centuries. The ethos was fashioned by a small minority, the feudal nobility, to privilege their class. Now Fred rose to the challenge of convincing the British people that absent critical systemic changes, leaving the European Union would do little or nothing to relieve the stress of economic instability and societal disintegration. He advised them, Ultimately, responsibility for the political trauma must be traced back to the causes of a failed form of taxation, which were responsible for dissolving the bonds that ought to be sealing relationships between government, corporations, and citizens. The British people's decision to leave the European Union prompted Fred to offer his fellow countrymen an analysis of what they could expect to happen, but also bring to light once more the origin of their distress. Class society was constructed on an egregious injustice. People's traditional right of access to land, on which the household economy depended, was erased. The evil effects were transmitted through the generations, and they remain with us to this day. The practical solution is to recraft the philosophy of taxation. No one who is willing to work, to save, and to invest would be disadvantaged by the ensuing reform. The cover of Fred's next publication, a monograph co-authored with economics professor Roger Sandilands, reveals the extent to which he felt compelled to be ever more direct. The British state is failing in its duty of care to the peoples of the United Kingdom. The young and the elderly suffer from attrition in the services they need. Law and order contracts because of underfunded police services. Military leaders report that the armed forces are not fit to defend the realm. And of course, there is the inevitability of the next severe financial and economic crisis as credit-fueled and speculation-driven investment in land and real estate drive up prices to levels that erode business profit margins and condemn millions of individuals to homelessness and, quite possibly, an early death. And now, with We Are Rent, Fred makes the case even more personal. This time could be different if people mobilize and mandate reform to the way governments raise their revenue. His diagnosis is aided by the prism of a new evolutionary blueprint. He interrogated the trends by deploying the techniques he used as an investigative reporter for a Fleet Street newspaper. He explains, "In We Are Rent, I draw on the work of anthropologists and zoologists, genetic scientists, and evolutionary psychologists to piece together the terms on which our ancestors gained a measure of control over one of the laws of nature. I reveal how this enabled them to buy the time and space to create a new kind of existence." As I explained in the video introduction, their creation, the solar galaxy, was anchored on planet Earth, but through their emerging collective consciousness, they expanded their presence into the universe. Our nearest cousins, the chimpanzees, remain within the laws of nature. Early humans behaved differently in one vital respect. They discovered the benefits of working a little longer, or a little better. They created the flow of energy which they did not need for biological subsistence. Classical economists call that net flow of resources economic rent. To achieve the benefits, they had to pool that net income for the common good. That income had to be protected from individuals who were tempted to use it for their personal benefit, relieving them of having to work by living off the labors of others. By sharing rent, the hominids of Africa invested in the genetic evolution of their anatomy, crucially by expanding the energy-hungry brain. That investment in what became their legacy assets, genetic, psychological, and cultural, made possible the formation of a unique space, the realm of the imagination. Combined with the aesthetic sensibilities and spiritual and moral codes of conduct which they developed, our ancestors embarked on the evolutionary path into a future which they painstakingly imagined, intentionally charted, and which they worked cooperatively to achieve. That evolutionary blueprint has now been abandoned. Rent has been privatized and turned against humanity. In its private state, it imprisons everyone, ranging from the overt form, slavery, to the covert, legally sanctioned devices that are deployed today. And finally, the rent privatizers of the 16th century incubated the culture of cheating and mutated it through colonialism into the form that now spans the globe. That is why we are now threatened by the ultimate existential crisis, the wipeout of our species. Privatized rent is at an advanced stage of causing the collapse of the legacy assets that were created on terms that enabled early humans to gravitate away from the life led by the chimpanzees. For nearly 5 decades, Fred Harrison has had important insights to share with us. He has given all that he has to give to pass on the knowledge that will set us free. Has the time finally come that we are ready to listen and then to act? Only the future will provide the answer. In the meantime, we would be wise to do what we can to protect ourselves and our families from the coming crash that follows 2026.